and welcome to the York Festival of Ideas. My name is Jess Hargreaves, I'm from the University of York, and I'll be presenting the event today, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you. Right, okay, and with that then, let's kick off, pun intended. So, yeah, this is the numbers game, data and modern football, and the observants among you may have realised that there's only one of me, Maths Talk. So I'm Jess Hargreaves. I was hoping to do this with Rich Bingham, who's also from the Maths department at the University of York, also in a group that we call QSA, Quantitative Sports Analytics York. And the idea of that is we do research into sports analytics, and we like to work with professional sports organisations. I'll talk about that a little bit today. And we also, I've been trying to get him to do this for years, and I finally cracked him. We also host a podcast called the Corridor of Uncertainty. It's a video podcast on YouTube. This is its logo. I'll give you a moment to see if you can spot the gentle genius of the logo. Always a good sign when, you know, how good a title of a podcast is, how good a logo of a podcast is, if you have to explain to people how good those things are. Right, anyway, so, anyway, like I say, so we'll throw a few references into that, grab a talk. So you've just got me today. If anybody's actually seen the Corridor of Uncertainty and was a massive Rich Bingham fan, I apologise. But he's unwell and he tells me, so he's just left me to do it himself. So, right, audience participation. Yeah, straight away I'm losing the audience, but I've already seen, I was hoping for this, I've already seen some football shirts on the way in. So we have to do it. Do we have any York City fans in the room? Oh, excellent. Right, I was actually going to wear a coat before I revealed this logo that's on my t-shirt. Do we have any Oldham Athletic fans in the room? No, not me either, shockingly, because this is my team. Any Leeds United fans? Excellent. Oh yeah, very good, very good. And then last two, because they'll sort of be important for our story today. Any Man City fans? Ladies? Ladies, yeah, we'll let you have that one. Arsenal? Ooh. Because I'm seeing Tottenham front and centre. You'll feature in our story as well. So, yeah, like I say, once again, the observant amongst you might have noticed that I told you I was a Leeds fan, but I'm wearing a t-shirt that's got one of these crests on that's not the Leeds United crest, it's the Oldham Athletic crest. Because like I say, as part of this Quantitative Sports Analytics York, working with professional sports organisations, we've actually been doing some work with Oldham Athletic. Right? So the few York City fans in the room will understand why I was a bit nervous about telling you this. But it's all good this year, right? We're over here. It's all good this year. We got promoted. It's the automatics. Don't talk to a Leeds fan about playoffs. Anyway. So the point is that, like I say, so you end up talking to all sorts of football teams. I can't, for various reasons, it's being recorded, I can't kind of give too much detail about where I've gleaned certain bits from. But just to say that through this work we've talked with lots of different football teams and organisations, so obviously including Oldham Athletic, Leeds United. I was chatting to their head analyst earlier this week and just thinking, I have the best job in the world ever. Who else have we talked to? Oh, you'll see. So this is soon to be released, it's coming soon, episode of the Corridor of Uncertainty. This person on the left here is Matt Penn, who's analyst for the FA. So very busy. Took time out of his schedule to talk to us. But before he was at the FA, he's worked at Oxford United, Oxford City, Como, in Italy. And I just wanted to play you a little clip from this upcoming episode to kind of set the scene a little bit. So let's see, hopefully this works.
I remember when I worked for Oxford United, we were in the same division as Bolton. I sat Oxford United versus Bolton. It was an important game for both teams. We were, I don't even know who we refer to. Oxford United were fighting relegation. Bolton were up at the top of the league. I had absolutely no idea what I wanted the result to be. In the end, it was disastrous, and it was 0-0 and someone got sent off. And so that's just clearly bad for both teams. So I walked out knowing that there were at least some results that I didn't want. But I had no idea who I was supporting. Apologies to all the people I work with at Oxford United.
Right, so I think that just shows that, so I've deliberately not shown you what I just said before that, and maybe you have to tune into the podcast to see what sparked him saying that. But yeah, so he's saying he's a Bolton fan, which shocked me. And he was watching Bolton play the team he worked for, and it's just a weird thing. He was saying how invested he was in Oxford United. Being part of the club, you feel the highs more, you feel the lows more than you would as a fan. So, like I say, that's to give you a flavour of the sort of people we're talking to, and I really need to give a massive thank you to Matt Penn, who some of the stuff I'm showing you today, he would let me say, has come from discussions with him. Right then, so that's setting the scene. So hopefully you've all seen this when you come to this session. The idea is that decision making in football, and I suppose sport, has historically been based on instinct, gut instinct and tradition. But as with every other corner of the world, data-driven decision making is taking over and revolutionising lots of different aspects of the game. There's so many places, so many things I could tell you about where maths crops up in football. But today we're going to focus on three, and one in particular. So you've got player performance evaluation. So before, after a match, you might say how well your players have done. Before a match, you might do some opposition scouting, and therefore, strategy development. So we're going to look at all the ways that that data could be transforming these aspects. But we're actually going to focus on one of them, which is player recruitment, because it sort of falls into two categories. If we're thinking about stuff that impacts what goes on the pitch, it's in two categories: recruitment, and then, like we say, pre and post match analysis. We're going to focus on the player recruitment because I think it gives you a little flavour. At the end, you'll see a little flavour of some opposition scouting, and in the middle, you'll see a little flavour of performance evaluation as well. So I'm sticking with that as our example to try and show you a few different things. And what we're going to do is we're going to think of a particular example today. We're going to imagine that we work for a football team and it's the January transfer window, so that means we can sign players. We're halfway-ish through the season and we can sign players, and we're going to try and use data-driven decision-making to inform that. So like I said, we've got a little example. We'll tell you a little bit about the industry, so what sorts of data is available to people like Matt Penn that we've just seen, what sort of jobs are out there. And then, like I say, we'll start seeing how the maths can be used within this example that we're going for before some conclusions. So the example, this is now going back to our earlier question, is why did Manchester City buy Semenyo? So it doesn't really matter if you don't know who this player is, it's just to give us sort of a story for us to travel through these different examples. And there's a couple of articles there, one from the Premier League website saying what Semenyo is going to bring to Man City's attack. And then the BBC website also claims to have answered the question we're asking today, which is why Man City have signed Semenyo. Nope. But this is the January transfer window. Like I say, we're halfway through the season, so you can go on a fantastic website called 11v11. You can pick a league, you can pick a date, and it'll tell you what the table looked like on that date. So this is the table from the 1st of January this year. We can see Arsenal at the top there on 45 points. We are Manchester City today. Boom. Literally no Man City fans in the room, right? So that's excellent. And we're in second on 41 points, so just behind. So we're thinking, what can we do? It's January, we don't want to, throw everything away. We're close, we're in second, but who might we be able to bring in to get us over the line? Now, like I say, those articles were having a go at trying to answer that question. So I've pulled out the key points that they made in those articles. So both of them are saying, is it an upgrade on what we've already got? So there's a quote there at the top that says, his stats suggest it won't be a huge improvement on the wide options they already have. So they've obviously already got some players that play this position, and this article is saying, you know what, he's not that much better than them. They're actually saying he makes fewer chances per 90 minutes than two of the current players. And his dribble success rate is only better than one person among the people who play his position. However, attack, at that point in time, in January, he was third top scorer in the league with 10 goals. And his defence is also good as well. So Semenyo is a midfielder, so that means he's doing a bit of both things, a bit of attack, a bit of defence. And he's ranking second among all Premier League forwards for recoveries. So this is where you're gaining possession from a loose ball or stray pass, an average of 5.06 times per 90. Now what struck me about these articles is a couple of things. They're already talking about stats. In a BBC article, I just talked at the start, my first sentence was, football's historically been done on instinct and tradition. And yet we're looking at an article on the Premier League website, the BBC website, and they're throwing stats in. That's the first one. The second question I ask myself is, where did they find these particular stats from? You know, if I'm the BBC journalist, I'm sitting down to write this article, where do I start in working out, you know, who is better than in what categories in the Man City team and then across the whole of the Premier League? What we're going to learn today is, if you know maths, it can do the job for you. But before we get there, we need to understand the landscape. So the type of data that you can get, there's 4 types of it. It falls into 4 categories. So tracking data is like the gold standard, the best data that you can have. Then underneath that, we've got event data, something called summary data, and then video analysis at the bottom. And on that picture on the right, you can kind of see which type of league is having which kind of data. So they're in that order. So tracking data is what's coming from, you know, when you watch the football players, you might see that they have kind of these packs on their back, right? That's where that tracking data is coming from. Or also from a video feed. They have special cameras in Premier League grounds that can take the whole pitch in. And they can, if I click this, yep. Edit, yep. So you can see, it can show you where the ball is, where all the players are at every point in time during the match. So this is the best you can possibly get. It's horrendous, right? I did, so let me see. I happen to know that an interview task for a Premier League club that's got a very strong data department involved analysing this kind of tracking data. It's massive. So it's like to the millisecond where 22 XY coordinates are, the ball as well, XYZ coordinates, so how high it is. It's huge. I had to come in to uni and use the special computers here. My laptop was just going down. Okay? But what's good about this is you can do on and off ball analysis. So you can ask questions like who's getting into the best space. But, like we say, you can't reasonably create it manually, so you need to have high quality video, and then they're using like AI machine learning to work out where all the players are at any point in time. So that's the best thing. This is what Man City will be using. So really, when I said to you, we're Man City, we're sort of going to take, maybe, because I didn't want to upset my laptop, we're going to, you know, take a lower league approach to the Man City problem. Okay. So the next step down is this event data. So there's around 5,000 events in a football match, and it's really only information for the on-ball event. So I really like this description that it's like the commentator's version of the match. So it's following the ball around, what happened. So you've got, like, you couldn't answer a question like we just had about who's getting into good space or who's doing good off the ball runs. You couldn't do that with this data. But it's still big and it's still useful. And it is actually created manually, so there's people whose job it is to sit and watch football matches with a spreadsheet in front of them and say there's 11 players between the ball and the goal. It takes them like a few hours to code up a game. And it's available for a wide range of competitions, right down to National League North and South in England. Next step down is what we call summary data. So this is kind of summarising that event data that we've just talked about. And so you get data providers like Opta that we can see there that produce this summary data. So a football club would have a subscription to a data provider. They can provide them with, like we say, this event data, or if they don't want to pay that much, maybe some summary data. So from basic statistics like total passes in the game to more advanced stuff, which could be like possession-adjusted statistics. So that might be, you know, how many passes you've got, but given that you only had 40% possession, that might be a bit better than we think. And what's great about this is that it does allow non-experts to work with this kind of quantitative data. So I was talking to somebody who works with a women's team, top flight women's team in another country, and she was showing me what their sort of, it's called stats bomb, portal looks like. She can log into it, she's getting all this sort of data, and it's nice and easy. It's point and click, you can see that, tell me what this person's total passes is, and so on and so forth. So, like I said, this is kind of, between these two things is what your lower level clubs are working with. And it's what we're going to work with today. But it probably doesn't surprise you to know that the university didn't seem keen on letting me have a StatsBomb subscription to paying all this money. So I went onto this great website called FBref, footballref.com. They've also got basketball and other sports stats as well. So this was data for the Premier League 2025-2026 season up to January, because we're Man City. We're trying to find a player. So it's just Premier League players. We're simplifying our job a little bit here. We're pretending there's no players in other countries that Man City might want to sign. They're just looking at Premier League players. And this is the kind of data that we've got. Unfortunately now, I don't want to get you too excited. For some reason, FBref have now taken this level of information down, so you can't go away. I don't know why that is, right? Maybe it's because people like me were trying to, yes, have a do-it-yourself StatsBomb account. But this is literally just passing. You could click on all sorts of other things. And recall, I'm a Leeds United fan, and so I looked at this and I was like, wow, look at that. Leeds United player, #1 ranked. So I've knocked off the column there at the end that said rank 1, Brendan Aronson. And then I realised, what is it? What is his passing metric that he's #1 in? Then I realised it was in alphabetical order. I was like, oh yes, #1 in alphabet, that's Leeds United, that crucial metric. That's just passing, so we could look at all of the things that we care about for midfielders and we could put them into a data set. So I managed to get, my friend Rich, got these 153 things for each player. Okay, I had 613 total players in that data set from FBref, but I'm Man City, right? I'm not going to be signing, it's January, I need someone to make an impact now. I'm not going to be signing somebody who's injured or not really playing. So I cut out people who had less than a certain number of appearances. So that went down to 491 active Premier League players. And then I care about a midfielder, so again, I've just cut it down to anybody who has got a midfielder in their position that they play. Okay then, so 178 midfielders, and I've got 153 metrics for each of them. We're going to scale the data to prevent larger, just because the value of the number might be a bit bigger, and that might dominate some of the analysis that we're going to do next. Okay? So for example, look, the number of goals seems to be going between 0 and 8. So that's this top one here, 0 and 8. But your sort of histogram of shots on target, that's a percentage, so that's going to be a number between 0 and 100. So if you scale the data, it just puts them, again, on a level playing field, okay, pun intended, so that they're all sort of getting treated the same. There's also a problem with what I'm calling redundancy. So a few of these, there's 153 of them, but they're sort of telling me the same sort of thing. So I've just given you some examples, and I'm just deliberately going to read them really fast to make a point. So what have we got here? Standard goals, standard shots on target. Standard shots on target is a percentage. Standard shots per 90. Standard shots on target per 90. Standard goals per shots and standard goals per shot on target. Right? So they are all giving you different information, but it's also kind of the same information. If you're good at one, you're probably going to be good at another. Again, this also might make our analysis difficult. Because if you've got like 30 things telling you the same sort of thing in there, in that mix, then that might get kind of overweighted, right? We might care about that more because there's just so many things telling us about that particular aspect. Okay. Like we've just said, some of them might be what we could call correlated. Like we said, if you're good at one, you'll be good at another. For example, I've got a plot here that's goals and shots on target. Okay? Now, the observant amongst you, what's wrong with this picture?
Negative shots.
We've got negative shots on target. That's because I scaled the data. Can you remember I put it all on the level playing field? So they're all taking the same sorts of values now. So that's just making it, giving it the same sort of shape, but making it be at the same sort of level. Okay? But we can see sort of there's a positive correlation here. More goals, more shots on target. So what we're going to do to fix these problems, this idea that we've got this redundancy and this correlation, is we're going to do something called principal components analysis. That's going to take care of that. This is a technique that I literally taught my students in the 3rd and 4th year in the lecture theatre next door last semester. So principal components analysis is what we're going to use here. So hopefully this is showing them that that thing I taught them is actually useful, is used in the football industry. So get ready, this is the sort of one equation of there's sort of three, but one equation of the whole talk. So hopefully that's bringing joy to your hearts, because you're all mathematicians. So, here we go. We've got lots of metrics, right? We call those variables. All the shots on target penalty, and so on. We want to simplify it, right? I'm just looking at that spreadsheet. Imagine I'm the BBC journalist. I'm just looking at that spreadsheet thinking, which of these things is Semenya the best at? Right? Total nightmare. Any way I can simplify it, reduce it down. So to put that into maths, I've got some number of these metrics, some number of variables P. I'd like to define some new variables, okay, that I'm going to call y. Well, I've got y1 up to yk, so that means I've got k of them, where k is less than p, just a smaller number of them. But I don't want to just define them randomly, I want to keep as much information as possible. So it's a bit like zipping a file so you can email it, right? I want to compress the data down into a few metrics. So what I'm going to do is take linear combinations of those original variables. This is just like taking an average of them, but a fancy average. Okay? So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to find linear combinations of the original variables. Okay? So some combination of the original 153, and that'll give me, right, that's your score for this new variable 1, and so on. Right. Okay. Like I said, we're going to think about this a little bit. It's our one equation, so I'm keeping it up there in the top right to get into your head. So the question is, how do we find what in that equation was the alphas? How do you find what you multiply these metrics by? I said it's like an average. An average, you treat them all the same. Give them all 1 over 163. But maybe I care about some of them more than the other. Maybe, like I said, I've got 30 things, so yeah, I want to kind of downweight all of them so that they don't dominate. Well, football practitioners use this idea all the time. So again, that person who was telling me about the women's football team, they, at the end of the match, would give a player a score. Now, I've simplified it down a bit to fit it on the slide. She said they pick 10 metrics that they think an attacking midfielder should have. Okay? And they do a fancy average of them. Okay? They just look at that summary data. How many assists did this player have? How many goals did she have? How many dribbles? How many tackles? And then we take this weighted average. Where does she get her 0.25, 0.25, 0.4, 0.1 from? Domain knowledge, right? They've just, in their years and years and years of watching football, they'll have started with some numbers and gone, that's not quite showing us the players we think are good as being good, so let's tweak it a little bit. And then year after year after year, she says that at the end of the season, they have a look at it and they tweak them a little bit. So they have these meetings. Are we sticking with the 10 variables? Are we sticking with those names? Similarly, if I'm looking at a defensive midfielder, so in this case we've got the same 4 variables, but we've got slightly different weights. So hopefully you're happy that if I'm a defender, I'm caring a little bit less about goals and assists, and a bit more about tackles, because you're a defender. But this is what's wondrous. Maths could do this job for us. Maths could find what, number one, the variables should be, but really what by actually finding what these weights should be, what these numbers should be. Here in these equations, the 0.2, the 0.2, up at the top, the alpha 1, the alpha 2, and so on. Because if that's a 0, it's saying, don't bother with it really. And if it's a big number, it's saying this is important. So, like I say, this is a 3rd year, 4th year maths concept. And we're going to have a go at doing it in a couple of minutes. Right? So, you're going to have to just bear with me and say that there's this PCA algorithm, right? The fancy average finder. What we do is we take our large data set that we've got with all our metrics, we put it into the PCA algorithm, and out come, like it looks at all these fancy averages, thinks about all those weights it needs for all the variables, and then goes, right, once I've done that, here's your fancy average 1, and then 2, and 3, and so on. So hopefully, yeah, I've had an absolute nightmare with this picture, so let's just, this took forever and I'm still not happy with it. But like I say, the grey lines are showing Whether or not, there's a big weight. If it's darker, that'll mean, right, I need lots of that green variable, not so much of that blue variable. Okay? So they all get averaged together to get our purple column. Okay, then we can do the same again, slightly different things to get the pink column, and so on. So, in our case, we're taking this huge spreadsheet that we've got for our players, we're passing it through the PCA algorithm, out comes these new points, much smaller, far fewer columns, and then I can plot these, right, as a scatter graph. I could see what's purple and pink, let's have a look at it. And it looks something like this. And so hopefully the idea of PCA is that it's doing all this job for us, it's finding the fancy average for us, but also it's, instead of staring at a spreadsheet, we can look at a picture now and hopefully get some information quickly. So let's look at that picture a bit bigger then. So here it is. This is score number 1, that they got fancy average number 1. So in some way this is the most important, it's containing the most information in the data set. It's containing 37% of the information in the data set, this fancy average. Second place, 9%, PC2. So PC1's getting a lot of the data, and we can add in extras and keep getting a little bit more, a little bit more. Now, I like this plot, right, let's have a little look at it. So we've got a little rainbow colour code going on. So in our data set, the players were coded up their position could be one of 5 things for midfielders. They've got defender midfielder, which is different to midfielder defender, right? Then a just straight up midfielder, then a midfielder forward, or a forward midfielder, right? So hopefully we can see there's a massive difference, right? And we've got this in a rainbow, so our defensive midfielders are red, going down through the rainbow to our forward midfielders in blue, okay? So what do I think when I look at this plot? First thing I notice is a bit of a sort of fan shape going on. Okay? Maybe we'll see why that's going on in a moment. Then, because I took the time to plot the colours, I'm going to have a look at the colours. And again, we're going to have some audience participation. I've got some prizes. Does anybody want to say to me what you're noticing about the colours in this picture?
Yellow. More yellow.
Yeah, good. So we've got yellow, lots of yellow. And where would that be? I'm getting a bit ahead of myself really, but where would that be sort of? Is it to the left, to the right, everywhere, at the top, at the bottom? At the bottom, good, well done, you're already ahead of me. Good, so you definitely gave me an answer. Right. So, let's have a little look then at these alphas. So what are the weights that our algorithm has picked out? Now I've given you a top 10 and the bottom 10 in terms of the biggest positive ones and the biggest negative ones. And for PC1, so that's what's going to take you in this direction, from left to right. Okay? We've got things like touches, receives, carries, attacks, team success, playing time, starts, whether you're a sub, and so on and so forth. So for me, when I looked at these weights, I sort of thought that maybe these are things that are saying like how good the player is, right? So like how many minutes you're playing, are you starting, are you doing the stuff in black seems to be jobs I think a midfielder should do. So my guess would be that maybe left to right might sort the good from the bad. So let's have a look then. Let's take our picture, and now each one of these blobs is one of our footballers. Let's actually put their names on. Okay, I could stare at this for ages. Let me see, I'm going to put over here. How well can we do? Okay, yeah, not so bad. So you can see Kyle Walker sticking out at the bottom. I've always got a soft spot for Kyle Walker, the Yorkshireman. Even though he plays Man City. I'll play Man City, was it? Isn't it? Anyway, Kyle Walker over here, Granit Xhaka, he's been doing well. Rice, Fernandez. You can see Semenyo up at the top there, Doku up at the top. So for me, players on the right-hand side, I've heard of. Players on the left-hand side, I'm just going to pick one out at random. Arthur Masuaku. I can't tell you what good that person plays. So I'm going to say to you that I think perhaps we were correct, right? Maybe left to right is something about how good the player is, because the people we've heard of, the good players are on the right, people we've maybe not heard of are on the left. And in case you wonder if you've not spotted already, there's Semenyo. Okay, remember, that's who we're thinking about today. Right, your turn. We've sort of given you a clue already. What does up and down represent then? So we've already thought about the rainbow, but let's have a look at the sort of things, sort of variables that have been picked out on the left. We've got in black, carries, touches, take-ons, shots on target, expected non-penalty XG, and then in red, okay, so because these are negative, these are bringing towards the bottom of this plot. These are things like pass type free kick, tackles in the defensive third, touches in the defensive third, okay? So what do we think PC2 is representing here? Whether, how up or down you're like, oh, how did I hit somebody?
Tackle defence.
Yeah. Are you a defensive midfielder or are you a forward midfielder? Okay? So that's what I came up with as well. So let's go back to our question then. Why did Manchester City sign Semenyo? Well, from looking at our analysis, it looks like he is indeed a bit of an upgrade, right? So we've got Semenyo. There he is. In our quality section, right, towards the right-hand side. Further right than Doku and Cherki, who, let me show you that. So you've got Doku, Cherki, there he is. These are the players that Man City already have. So on our how good is the player metric, he is to the right. Okay? And he's up at the top here as an attacker, as opposed to a defender. But again, look, he's a bit lower than Doku. So maybe he's offering something different in terms of attack and defence, that combination. Okay? So what I hope I've shown you is that I was really shocked when I did this. I just literally got Rich to download that data for me, chucked it into this PCA algorithm that we teach the students, because it was just this massive Excel spreadsheet, plotted it, and then I was like, oh, look, Semenyo's right there. Looking, separating himself from the crowd. And so hopefully I'm arguing that, like I say, Matt can do that job that the BBC journalist who's trawling through all the stats maybe took a bit longer, or like we said, the people working at the football club trying to think of those weights, iterating year after year to improve them, whereas we can just let Matt do it, and it seemed to do a pretty good job. So, they signed Semenyo in January. For those of you who don't know, no Man City fans in the room, what happened next, right? But in February, he got player of the month, and I was looking at this picture, it's on the Premier League website, I'm looking at that, I'm like, oh, is that a Leeds player in the background? Indeed, because it's the first time Semenyo has won the award, having recorded 3 goals and 1 assist across 5 appearances in the Premier League in February, netting against Tottenham, Fulham and Leeds United. Excellent. And yeah, like I say, I went on to the, just to check, I went on to the Man City website. Semenyo's trying to give City 3 vital points at Ellen Road. Yes, indeed, that is where that picture came from. Thank you very much, Man City. Okay, so like I said, let's go back to our question. And why did Man City buy Semenyo? Because in January, they were 4 points behind. They've signed him, he's making an instant impact, he's getting Premier League Player of the Month. Did Man City manage to overtake Arsenal for the title? No. Actually, the gap got bigger. To be fair to them, I think they sort of gave up a little bit towards the end, didn't they? But anyway, yeah, still stuck in second, so he didn't get them over the line. And yeah, Arsenal champions. But it does make you think, right? Here we are, one of our episodes, and this is actually my favourite episode we've ever done. So this was the question, what's the best January transfer ever? And in February, when Semenyo was winning the Player of the Month award, we were thinking, maybe it's going to be Semenyo. So we did an episode, who do we think are the best January transfers ever? And I'll reveal that the 3 players on there, kind of, 2 of them were my suggestion, and 1 of them is Rich's suggestion. It's kind of a battle where we're using really, really bad mathematicians and trying to use maths to make our points, right? So, yeah, go away and see if you think you agree with us or disagree with us about who the best January transfer ever is. But I will say, 2 players on that screen, Vidic, and so we've got Van Dijk, did the same thing. They joined a team in second and then were second at the end. But if you look at the detail, you can see that the underpinning stats did turn that season, and I think both of them then won I think Man U won the next season, and it took Liverpool a little bit longer perhaps. And then, yeah, Any prizes? Does anybody know who that is on the right?
Dan Burn.
Big Dan Burn. That's where his head's off the top. It's too big. Right? So yeah. Okay. I'm looking at the time and I'm going to skip that a little bit so we've got time for some questions. So what have we learned today then? So principal components analysis, this thing that I teach my students. I hope I've convinced you that it does a good job of summarising huge data really quickly. Okay, so the stuff that I've sort of skimmed over, but you could also use these ideas for opposition scouting or player recruitment, right? So you could think, if you're Bournemouth, we've just lost Semenyo. Who's like Semenyo? Who's close to Semenyo? Who should we sign? Or if we're going to play Man City next week, and we think Semenyo's playing, who's he like that we've already played before? Okay. So just last couple of things then, so like I said, a bit of a watch list for you then. You've all got to go away, see if you agree with me or Rich. There is an episode where we do this, why did Man City sign Semenyo, but you've had the extended version, so maybe we won't bother with that one. And like we said before, we're really excited about this, the Matthew Penn interview, FA analyst, that's going to be released during the World Cup, where he's got his two parts, one where he's talking about his career as a football analyst, and one where we're talking a little bit of fun about the World Cup about to happen. So that's it from me. Do we have any questions other than who is the best Jamie transfer ever? Thank you for listening.
Very simple question. What's the difference between defender forward or forward defender? Is that what you said?
Yes, yeah. I asked that question myself as well, because like I said, when you look at the data set, I'm going to go back now. Okay, that might be. So I'm getting it from, it's this column, and there, can you see my mouse? This column here, then my mouse isn't working, this one here, right? So you can see, it's got things like, so Brendan Aronson, number 1 for Alphabet, he's a forward, comma midfielder, and so on. So I saw that they were coded up in these two different ways. That was my first question, is it actually different? And when I looked at it, I believe it is. Actually, I think what they should have is 2 columns, primary position, secondary position.
Yeah.
So, and I think if you've not got a secondary position, you're just that position, right? So I do think there is a subtle difference between, when you look at who the players are, there is a subtle difference between, now you're first and foremost a forward, you can play midfield, or you're first and forward midfield, you can play.
So when they start, you see, I won't go off, but when they start, they have 2, 1, 6, don't they? As long as it adds up to 10. They can put them in a combination, can't they?
Yeah.
And does the other team have to do the same, or can they do differently?
As in, with their...
With the arrangements of the players, like some can have 2 defenders.
Yeah.
Because even players can have 3 defenders if they want.
Yeah, oh, good question, Andy. I'm devastated because I took a slide out that would have exactly answered this for you. Because one of the things about Semenyo is he plays left and right. He can play on the left and the right.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, they don't have to, you've got 11 players, but you could play 11 goalkeepers if you wanted to, but it's not the way to go. So yeah, it tends to be the classic one, 4-4-2, 4 defenders, 4 midfielders, 2 forwards, but like we say, within that, your defenders or midfielders could be forward midfielders or defensive midfielders, and so on. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So is there any data to say when it fails?
Right.
I'm just thinking of one in particular, and it'll be close to your heart.
Go on then.
Calvin Phillips.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so I've done actually, this might be next year's talk, right? A study in Calvin Phillips. Because I've done some work on, if you had, like if you think about what we're doing here, and you take everything and you try and get a player ranking number, right? And so this is what we're trying to develop with Oldham, so that we could quickly be like, oh, this player's a 97 and this player's a 96, you know, and so on. But to me what was interesting was, how does that develop over time, like from the start of your career to the end? And then of course I always think about, as a Leeds fan, James Milner. And Dominic Calvert-Lewin. I always think about Dominic Calvert-Lewin and Calvin Phillips. Because I think James Milner's really interesting with the long career going to the different clubs. And Calvin Phillips is really interesting, like kind of the opposite reason. He's gone to these different clubs and seen how it impacts. So yeah, that's super interesting. And from the player perspective, about if that was the right move to do, because he would have been playing week in, week out at Leeds. So, in answer to your question, we're definitely doing that sort of analysis because we also work with people called Just Ball who work with players who are trying to make it. So like I say, from that perspective, it was like, was that decision for Calvin Phillips the right one? So that's kind of where my question was coming from. So like I say, maybe next year we'll do a whole thing on compare and contrast. Dominic Calvert-Lewin's on my mind today because he's in the background, that Semenyo picture. Calvin Phillips and James Milner. So we'll do that next year. But the question about, is there any ever analysis about does it go wrong? So like I say, yes there is. And that, you know, all the football teams you talk to, they do have these periodic, you know, time where they think about, we use this method, did that really pan out, or did it go the way we thought, do we need to adjust what we're doing? I'll tell you a little story. I think I'm allowed to say this, I'm going to be quite vague in what I say. I was doing a version of this analysis, slightly more like souped up version of what I've just shown you. Because, as I said, I don't want to take the York City fans back to this point in time. This time last year, Oldham had just been promoted from the National League through the playoffs back to League 2. And they had some loan players, so it was known that those loan players were going to go back to the clubs that they, you know, their parent clubs. And there was one particular player who was, you know, absolutely outstanding in the playoffs. As I said, don't want to trigger anything for any York City fans. They played each other in the playoffs. And so the question was, what kind of player would we want to bring in? Now, we've had this success with the loan player. We always knew that was a loan player. Who could we bring in that would kind of do that job? So I did this sort of thing. Where is this player? Who's close to him? And then a lot of this that I've shown you today, it's not like, you know, I go, sign Semenyo, and then Man City go, okay, Jess. It's just you're giving them a short list of names, and they're going, you know, and then they're doing all the stuff, like actually watching them play football and things. So that's what I was doing, and I gave them a list of 5 players. And I said, honourable mention, I'll throw in this one, in 5th spot. It's not quite, my math isn't quite showing with this guy, but I'm thinking, you know, from the eyeballing it, I think he could be a suitable replacement. Anyway, he signed him. Nothing to do with what I'd done, it was already happening. Got an email from someone else who works with the club who went, Jess, I've just seen the bottom of your email where you totally called that. So now, like, I'm so invested in this guy's career, every time he comes on. I don't think his mum's watching this intently as I am. But yeah, so, but the point is, absolutely, I think that there is that kind of, we've signed this player, did they do what we thought we would do? So yeah, we don't just kind of go, there is always that review process.
Well, actually, ended his England career, didn't he? Calvin Phillips.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, oh, and like I said, we'll do a York Festival of Ideas next year on it, because there's so much we can talk about in terms of selection bias, and the problem if you go to a club, a manager comes in doesn't like you, how that can, you know, end your England chances and so on. So yeah, really interesting stuff. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, oh yeah, next go.
No.
It's Tom. Yeah.
Tom, okay. What you've described is an analysis based on one current form, if you like, so for this one season. And I would imagine that clubs, if they're serious about this, are doing it over more than one season. And what triggered my thought process here was Manchester City sold Morgan Rogers 2 seasons ago, and I noticed how close he was to Semenyo on that list, which then made me think, which is one point, right? Quite an interesting point, because they probably regret that decision now. The second point was, to what extent do you believe that the clubs do sensitivity analysis on this? Because you can't just take point 2 or point 3 or whatever it is for a triple pass. There's got to be a degree of sensitivity around that. And when you get 2 players that are close to each other, and I would suggest Morgan Rogers and Semenyo are very similar, it makes you wonder whether Manchester City really do regret that decision. And I wonder if you had any comment on that in terms of the sensitivity analysis part of this.
Yeah, like I say, so I think it sort of comes into what we're saying there as well in terms of also being reflective and iterative, yeah. So that would have been one of my arguments. So the journalists were saying, you know, he's not that much of an upgrade, he's very similar to what they've got already. But I would have argued that in January that's what you want. You don't want this revolutionary player, you want who's radically different from what you do, and you want someone who can fit in. So these are, from our plot that we had, these are the 10 closest people to Semenyo, just at this plot. So actually, as I said, we're hugely simplifying things, so we're taking all those variables and we're just going to condense it down to 2, who are the nearest 10. And we do see Doku and Cherky in this list. And then we see some other people. So that's why I was saying Semenyo's nearest neighbours may be you know, Belmont might look at Kudos or Bowen. Kudos had just gone to Tottenham this season, so I was like, I don't think you were going to prize him from Tottenham, but then, and obviously Bowen is a massive West Ham fan himself, captain of West Ham, plays for West Ham. So would they prize either of those two? But then they're both in the relegation scrap. I was sort of thinking, let's see if Bournemouth pick up one of these, give these players. Anyway, but like I say, sensitivity analysis, yeah, like I say, there's two questions we're asking here. So yeah, realistically, Man City are doing stuff with the player tracking data, like absolutely huge research and development department, people with PhDs, and so on working for them. So they're not doing what I've shown you today, they're doing super complex stuff, and then, like I say, that's just one part, the first step of the decision-making process. So absolutely they will be doing that sort of thing. But for me, I think that the challenge when you're a club like Oldham is you're not Man City, you can't have anybody, so actually you'll learn that a lot of this is what I've learned, and there's the football fan and there's the mathematician. You kind of do this and then there's so much other stuff that then determines whether a player can come to this club. Is, you know, they're in contract, are they likely to drop down? You know, we've identified this person in League One would be a suitable replacement, but are they going to drop down to League Two? We'd have to pay them more to make them do that, sell them on a vision that we're going to be in League One, and so on. And again, I'm not going to say too much, but there's also obviously connections between managers, previous people they've worked with, and so on. So yeah, 100%, like you said, we've done quite a simplistic version. This is absolutely not the level that Man City would have done. But it kind of is that when you're further down, you don't really have the luxury of thinking of that sensitivity analysis because you're sort of limited in terms of who you can take. Got time for some more?
Yeah.
Boss says yeah.
Thank you. You've got some, hello. You've got some great data there. I was wondering, for, let's say, the lay analyst, what sources out there do we have for events and summary and tracking data, for example? Are there free resources that we can use?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So we go right back. I like this image that I took off Matthew Penn. So, like I said, one of the data providers that a lot of the clubs use is called StatsBomb, and that is absolutely a very fitting title because when you look at it, it's like a bomb of stats has gone off on your computer screen. You think that when I showed you from the FBref website, it's insane, especially when you look at the event data and stuff. But yeah, StatsBomb, they have like a free sample version. If you go onto their website, and you've got stuff like, they do have some examples, I don't think they call it 360 data. That's kind of, it's not tracking data, but it's kind of like event data, but where was everybody on the pitch when this event happened? So it's like somewhere between the event data and the tracking data. So yeah, you can have some fun with that. And maybe to say, like I said, so I didn't talk about this too much. So video analysis is what's been happening for a long time, where you just have like a video watching your training session and people would manually go through it. That's kind of the lowest level. But yeah, like I say, summary data, event data, and a little bit of tracking data. If you just type in, say, StatsBomb's one example, but there's others as well, because they're sort of trying to convince people to buy the product. And there's loads of cool videos and resources on their website and on other websites as well that show you how you could have a go at analysing it. And one of the other episodes of the Code of Uncertainty, Rich had a go at using this event data to do some stuff. So he was doing what is the corridor of uncertainty, what is XG, how do you calculate XG? So yeah, he had some fun. And again though, he had to come into work to use his fancy computer. But you can definitely do some cool stuff with summary data and event data on a laptop. You don't need to go to the gym today.
Oh, sorry. So I also sort of watch the sport, baseball, and they've had sort of same metrics for years and years and years.
They invented this.
Moneyball was a massive thing in the 90s. I guess, do you feel that football's learned from these other sports? And sometimes people say like football's very slow to embrace it. Would you think that's a fair assessment or not?
Yeah, I do think that. But what I've heard is, so you're right, baseball, it's about the nature of the game. It's a turn-based game. It's not dynamic like football. I think the most dynamic game is ice hockey. They're like rolling subs. I don't know how anybody analyses ice hockey, do you? But yeah, but football's up there as one of the most dynamic and difficult to kind of understand what's going on. Whereas baseball, and people are quite static, something happens, you can record it. So that's why historically that's felt natural. That's something that people who go to the baseball game have scorecards. They've been doing these things for like since the start of MLB. The interesting thing though that I heard somebody, so I was at a conference and there was somebody who worked for, I want to say the Seattle Seahawks, an NFL team, was presenting. He's the head of analytics for that team. And he was saying his experience, so that's a similar question, in his experience he thinks that all the sports think baseball's like got it sorted. Which of course baseball would say, there's always room to keep innovating. And they all think that they're not doing it as well as they could do and that the other sports are doing it better. There is this perception that football's been slower, that there was this kind of resistance to these newfangled data way of doing things. Read a book called, I think it's either How to Win the Premier League by Ian Graham, who was head of analysis at Liverpool, or it's something like Expected Goals. One of those two books, and it was talking about the silent data revolution in football. One of the things that they argue for, Matthew Penn says this as well, is things like Football Manager and FIFA, where you're playing a computer game and it does represent players using numbers, has meant that there is a generation of football player, and then people like me who aren't professional football players, who are used to seeing numbers next to footballers and thinking about that in a decision-making process. So I think that's why kind of this slow, sort of stealth data-driven revolution. We could see in the BBC article again, can you imagine that article being there 20 years ago that's thrown out those sorts of stats? So, yeah, I do think that it's kind of, maybe it's just a bit quieter than in other sports. There's not like a film with Brad Pitt in, because it kind of happened under the radar a little bit. But you're always going to get, so when I talk to people, you've got Premier League clubs, like I said, Liverpool, Man City, huge research and development departments, Brighton and Brentford, famously smaller clubs. So Brentford, I was talking to the owner of Brentford, who's called Matthew Benham, who owned like a gambling kind of company and was involved in trying to predict football matches and thought, oh, you know what you could do? Apply maths to football. It's a bit longer than that, but yeah, he's a massive fan of the club, obviously had a ton of money, they needed some help, so he started investing, and then of course he brought his day job to the game. But he was saying, look, I think that where we are with Brentford, there's a massive gap between the top teams of the Premier League, but maybe not for the rest of them. And that's doable. With this amount of investment, he's approaching like a businessman, with this amount of investment, we could secure ourselves as a mid-table, Premier League team that's always in the Premier League. So that's kind of the Brighton and Brentford approach. So they're these kind of maybe traditionally smaller clubs, but taking it really seriously. And so the other clubs look at that and go, look, Man City and Liverpool are doing well. Brighton and Brentford are doing better than you would sort of think they would do. Bournemouth are a similar one. So it's happening, but yeah, like I said, when you talk to people, it is kind of slower because, again, I'm not going to name any names, but you kind of talk to people who work for the football clubs, and the story's always like, I joined and it was a team of one. And stuff. And so the reason I put this on is I think because, so we talked about York City, National League, Oldham, they were in the National League. They were both employing somebody as an analyst. So they are spending money on employing somebody as an analyst. That person probably has coaching badges, they're probably doing that as well, because at that level you sort of need people to do more than one thing. As we move up, so League 2, League 1, like we say, you might have an analyst now who's full-time analyst and the teams are getting bigger and bigger. But you will get Premier League clubs that are, I'm a team of 2 or 1 or whatever. Because the gaps between sort of League 2, League 1, Championship, there's a lot of overlap there. So those sorts of people probably have like a master's. They'd have to be happy using stats on that kind of data. But actually, when I was talking to that person who works for the women's football team, like I say, actually they've made a nice little interface that actually you can kind of analyse this data without having to get into the weeds a bit. But yeah, talking to Premier League Football Club, they sort of be like, we want to go more than that, we don't want to just use what they're giving us because everyone's doing that, we have to get into the data and do cool things. So your people at the top Premier League clubs who are really taking data seriously will be looking for people with PhDs. It's that kind of level. But they could earn a load more if they went and worked for a bank. So they are employing you, but not at like market rate. It's just because you love football so much you're happy to work for Premier League football team of your choice. I'm just worried, I was looking at that clock wasn't even paying attention to the hour hand, thinking, oh no, we're running out of time, and that's like, I cut the whole part of my talk out, and I realised the actual time is not at all. But anyway, we're fine. Yeah, so still time for questions, which is good.
Does your data take into account quality of opposition? Because presumably someone in League 2 might have great data, but put them up against a Premier League defender and they would be a lot less.
Yeah, great question. Yeah. So what we got here, we started saying summary data, like you might want to have possession adjusted summary data. Same thing for maybe not so much your event data, but when you're sort of combining it here, there is that kind of, because we were asking this question a few times when you're looking at kind of XG. Let's not get into XG today, but the general idea is what's the probability if someone's taking this shot, what's the probability it goes in. Well, there is a question about, but what about the defenders if they're championship defenders, that's different to Premier League defenders and so on. So yeah, a lot of, like we say, lower level people will just be taking those things as they are, and StatsBomb might start looking at how you might do a league adjusted version of that. But yeah, like I say, your higher level teams absolutely would be taking account of the opposition and kind of other things as well. Because like I say, if you really are Man City, you're looking worldwide, so you also need to not, like we've got the problem of, is this championship player good enough to play in the Premier League? But then, how do we compare somebody who plays in the Scottish Premier League or Serie A? Where are they going to fit? So they have all fancy ways that you can kind of cross-pollinate and work out what does a good defender in Serie A, what do their stats look like as opposed to. So yeah, there is a way of doing that, but it's kind of, you've got your super clever people who do that one.
I think we've got time for one more.
Hi, I was just struck by that the slide you showed of the league table when Bournemouth sold Semenyo, and at the moment, from the moment they sold him, Bournemouth went shooting up the league, and I just wonder, can maths explain like anomalies like that, and Leicester City winning the title with pretty much the same team they had the season before?
How's it gone though? Yeah.
That's a big question.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's something that Rich Bingham, the Some Analysis, tried to answer using maths. So I'd say you need to watch the podcast. I think you'll like, you have the same questions that we do. It's really interesting, isn't it? So there's all sorts of things in a league table. I mean, this is all areas of research about actually should we look at league tables like this partway through the season to see if you can sort of have quality of opposition adjusted league tables that you can look at as well. You can look at something I'm doing some work with Oldham and some people at Syracuse University, who's really strong with their sports analytics, on sort of how good were we and expected points, like where should we be. So yeah, absolutely, you can do that kind of research and kind of look at the stats and think, was that a sort of fluky result? So we shouldn't kind of, though you might have got 3 points, but it's not maybe representative of actually how good that team was. So you want something that maybe further takes that into account. So yeah, we've sort of done some work on that, and that's, again, there's some cool articles. If you Google Matthew Benham, look at the Wikipedia page and then start looking at the references that they're using, there's some really nice description of how they've got, models where they can look at different leagues and try and find clubs that look lower in the league than they think their models are saying than they should be. So then it's like, right, we're identifying that actually people are thinking that Bournemouth are a 15th team, but really we know that they're a 10th place team. So let's go and have a look at the Bournemouth players, see who's responsible for that, and maybe steal them, because no one else really cares about Bournemouth because they're in 15th position. So to answer your question, if you look at a few things happened. I mean, let's not even, we can talk about this. You can look at all football seasons. A few things happened the year Leicester won. Some of it was other teams didn't, and I think this happened a bit with Liverpool last year. Got any Liverpool fans? Good, okay. I think Liverpool, maybe they won it, but it was kind of other teams lost it a bit more than Liverpool winning it, right? So I think that was the year with Leicester as well. I think other teams didn't do what they should do, and that opened a door. But also, if you look at the analysis, it does seem to be that you know, you can get lucky unless they just seem to get lucky. And then, of course, it's momentum and mindset and all these other things as well that goes into it. But yeah, certainly there are ways of, football clubs do look at ways of kind of seeing if they can rank the teams, yeah, not just looking at league tables. Okay, is that it? Good. All right, well, thank you so much.